Welcome. This is Paige's Promotions, and we are doing, once again, another episode of Indie Reads TV, where we discuss the book world with independent authors and other super fun people of the book. Today, my guest is the esteemed author, Andrew Charles Lark. He's written this really cool book called Better Boxed and Forgotten. It's an awesome fun romp through downtown Detroit, Indian Village area. It's a ghost story. It's paranormal. It's super fun. It's got super fun twists and turns. Today we're going to talk about that, and we're going to talk about a little bit more about his writing process and style and what he's got coming up in the works. So, Andrew, thank you very much for being here today. I appreciate you coming in.
Thank you very much for having me. It's a pleasure.
So let's talk a little bit about how you got into writing. How did this crazy thing start for you?
You know, I actually started writing probably over 20 years ago. I was acting, and, you know, during rehearsals, there's a lot of downtime and whatnot. And, you know, I was always working with a script, and once the lines were memorized, I had all these ideas for my own scripts. So I actually started out more as like a playwright than I did a novelist. And I connected with a friend who had a murder mystery company. Okay. And he had written his own murder mysteries, and I thought, I can do that. So I wrote a couple of these very cheesy murder mysteries, you know. One of them was actually titled Stop Acting, You're Killing Me, or The Flowery Young Belle of St. Petersburg, you know, an overwrought, you know, overdramatic kind of Russian melodrama, I guess. And, you know, and they were funny, and I would use them as fundraisers. I remember we put one on at Avon Players in Rochester, and we filled that theater up. And people responded, and they liked it, and they laughed at all the right places. They even laughed at some places where I wasn't expecting laughter.
Audiences are that way.
Exactly, and it's always a nice little surprise when that happens. So, and then I always thought, okay, I've got a book in me. I've had this idea for a very long time. I started writing Better Boxed and Forgotten, and I had probably 100 pages, and I got stuck. And I remember I went to Wayne State University and I took some writing classes, and through doing that I got unstuck. And at the time I was a bricklayer, and I had to have back surgery, so there was a certain amount of recuperation that had to take place. And I used that downtime to finish Better Boxed and Forgotten. The writing was fun, but as you know, the whole editing process...
not always fun.
Not always fun, exactly. I actually wrote Better Boxed and Forgotten, and it took longer to edit it than it did to write it. But, you know, if you're putting your name on something, you want to make sure it's perfect.
Sure.
Or as perfect as it can be.
Oh, absolutely. We're all super vigilant about that. Why did you choose paranormal for your first novel adventure? Why that genre instead of some other?
Yeah, it's funny because, you know, my plays were always comedy. And I think the key word there is probably visceral. You know, comedy can be visceral. It just cuts right through things.
Sure.
With horror, with paranormal, I think it's the same element. It's something visceral. It's when something really terrible happens, you react in a very honest way. You react in a way that's just... It cuts through everything, and you have to react off of that horror. And I think it creates for some very honest moments, some very candid moments. And you get to learn about characters and what they're going through, because they have to deal with this situation kind of with all their heart and soul. And what are they made of? You know, and with a paranormal element in a house, I think you learn that pretty effectively.
Sure. One of the interesting aspects of what you do, and I know that Stephen King does this in his books, but I get the impression that he does it more for shock value than anything. You have some young characters in this book, some children, and I like how you worked them in, because it wasn't over-the-top, scary, rip the children's limbs off kind of horror or paranormal, but the element of young people in your books, I think, added a layer of depth that a lot of paranormals don't have. It wasn't just shock for shock's sake's value. It
Yeah.
was there's another layer to why this little girl is in this book, why this little boy is in this book, and they added not just as a sideline character, but it seemed like there was an additional plot device in using the children. Was that intentional, and how did you set that up?
Well, I think that when you put a child at risk, the stakes are really high.
Mm-hmm.
And I wanted the stakes high, for the reader to read this, of course. But it's also giving you a window, obviously, on how their parents are reacting as well. Now, my protagonist, Daniel, I think the word that really defines him is obsessed. He's obsessed with this house.
Yes,
He's
I would
obsessed
agree
with
with
the
that.
objects in the house to the point of being careless with his own family. Now, I perceive Daniel as someone who he's a reliable narrator. He's telling you the truth, the reader, but he's not being honest with the other characters in the book, and you see that.
Right.
And
And in
it-
some cases, he's not even being honest with himself.
Yeah, I almost equate reading Better Boxed and Forgotten like, say, as you're the reader, it's almost like you're Daniel's psychiatrist. And this is kind of like a big confessional.
Sure.
Again, he's being honest with you, and you're watching or you're reading as his story unfolds. What's the point of therapy if you're not being honest with your therapist? And, a lot of this, I didn't consciously set out and think this through, but I just wrote organically. And I did not, with Better Boxed and Forgotten, I didn't have the whole thing mapped out. I didn't, have anything, I know a lot of writers will map things out very meticulously. And
Mm-hmm.
I want this to happen in chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3.
Sure.
I didn't do that. I would finish a section and then I would think about, okay, what's going to happen next? And I always asked myself, okay, what do the characters want in this next scene, and what are they going to do to get it? And that's something that actors ask themselves when they're playing a character in a script. What do they want, and what will they do to get it?
Sure, that piece of motivation that we hear so often bantered around the theater, bantered
Right.
around film sets. Motivation, what's the why behind it?
Right.
So what's the why behind bringing the children into the story?
Again, I think the stakes are higher with children. And also, within the story, we have a paranormal character who's a child herself. I think
Right.
she's 16 years old. And I think that, in my book anyway, the paranormal child in this book is drawn to the other children in this book. Children relate to children.
Yeah, that's true.
And I don't want to say that the paranormal character in my book, Nora, I don't think she's evil. I just think she's in this place where she doesn't really know where she's at. In a way, I think she's an innocent, and you're obviously going to find out more about her in the long-awaited
don't
book
spoil
too.
it for us.
No, I'm not going to do that. But I think again, Nora is drawn to the children. I mean, if a child is given a choice between choosing a room full of adults or choosing a room full of children with toys and games in it, that child would choose the room with children and games in it. Maybe it's the same for a child ghost.
That's an easy thing to believe. That's a layer of the story that would be easy to suspend that disbelief and go, yeah, that's a plausible thing.
Right.
So you hinted about the sequel. I know that you have a couple of other books planned for this series. Without giving away too much of either Better Boxed and Forgotten, because I love the ending, and I don't want you to give away the ending, but
Sure.
Can you give us a little hint of what's to come with the next book?
Well, it picks up where it left off, literally. I know that Better Boxed and Forgotten leaves you in a place where, okay, what now?
Mm-hmm.
The next book is going to be titled, or it is titled, The Persistence of Whispers.
Okay.
And The Persistence of Whispers picks up where Better Boxed and Forgotten left off. I'm also going to be introducing some new characters, but I'm doing something different in The Persistence of Whispers that I did not do with Better Boxed and Forgotten. Better Box and Forgotten mostly takes place inside the house on Seminole Street.
Right.
I split off in The Persistence of Whispers, and you're in both the house on Seminole Street in Detroit, and then you're also going to New York, where the museum is, the Tiffany Glassworks Museum.
Right.
So because we have to continue to follow the story of a device that was introduced in
Correct. Right.
Yeah.
That's a strong plot point.
Right.
That plot thread is really strong.
Yeah,
and
remember,
for you to leave it where you left it and never visit it again,
and we have an
really
entire
irritate a lot of us.
Archive full of stuff that needs to be explored too. So I may pull a couple more things off the shelves, and some neat little devices that are needed to solve the dilemma at hand.
So, can you tell us about how soon you might imagine that book will be available?
I wish. I know. I've passed so many deadlines, and part of it is I want The Persistence of Whispers to be every bit as good as Better Box and Forgotten was. I have like a 4.7 rate. For what it's worth, I have a 4.7 rating on Amazon.
Right.
A lot of people responded very well to the book. It's been called a page turner.
So is this a sense of you feel a pressure to meet that same expectation with the next book? So you're being a bit more meticulous with it?
There's a thing about, like, you heard the whole thing about, like, the freshman album of the rock star. It goes through the charts. Everybody loves the album, and my God. And then the second album comes out and not quite as good as the first one. I don't want that to happen with The Persistence of Whispers. I want there to be I want the book to be every bit as good or even better. And so I think that I put a little bit of I'm putting too much pressure on myself, honestly, and I've participated in your writers groups, and when I do that, I get a lot of work done. There's some good work being done there.
Right.
And,
writing in community is really helpful for
right.
a lot of authors.
And the other factor is before, when I wasn't working on The Persistence of Whispers, I simply would not write. And I'm not doing that anymore. So I have other projects that are keeping me keeping the machine lubed, I guess you could say. I'm writing a play titled Viv and Vince. I'm writing. I'm involved in an anthology, like a dystopian anthology, which is fun. And I'm also I continue to do my podcast, which actually we recorded with you last summer.
That was a lot of fun.
Good.
Are you thinking about doing another installment?
Absolutely. I want to do 5 altogether. We've got 3 recorded. I still have 5 to go. And plus, being a teacher, it's kind of difficult for me to commit to. I can't say it's difficult to commit because I always have time to write, but summertime is when I can really knock out a lot of my writing. But what I've been doing lately, the past 6 months, is if I'm at a standstill with this project, then I will close that document and open it up another project and start writing that. So I'm not simply just not writing. I'm just simply going on to another project. So I guess you could say I've become like a juggler, with my projects and
juggling projects is something that I know very well, working on 4 different ones right now.
Right. See,
I understand that. Oh, the gears aren't really turning well on this one, so let's move on and work on this other one.
Yeah, exactly.
I understand that.
Right.
And it gives it some time for the first project you were working on to kind of simmer a little bit,
yeah,
kind of marinate in its own juices, and then you can come back to it after you've spent some time away from it.
I had the advantage also with Better Box and Forgotten to be convalescing off of a back surgery. And so there was literally nothing to do except for writing. But I don't recommend you get a back surgery, to write.
Yeah, let's not injure ourselves purposefully to
right.
find time to write. We can procrastinate in another way.
We can suffer for our art to a point, right?
Right.
But not to the point where we actually go under the knife.
Yeah,
So,
not such a great idea.
Yeah, right.
So I'm really excited to share with people that you're going to be teaching for Pages Promotions a script and screenplay writing workshop for us in July. I'm really excited about that opportunity because Detroit is a very rich theater
It is.
community, and I'm really excited to see what people can bring out of your tutelage in script writing. Can you give us an idea of what people might expect when they come to that workshop?
Yeah. Well, let me say this first of all. A lot of people don't know this, but Detroit has the second most amount of professional theater seats in the country, second only to New York. We actually even have more professional theater seats than Chicago. And we have a lot of wonderful theaters in this town and wonderful theaters that will do locally written stuff. I'm actually a big fan of the work that they do at the Ringwald Theater in Ferndale. One of my plays was produced there a few years ago, and I would be honored to have that happen again. But anyway, but yeah, there are lots of great things. But as far as like my workshop goes, I'm going to probably it's going to be like a workshop. I'm going to introduce the writing of dialogue. Obviously, there's a difference between writing prose and writing dialogue.
Absolutely, yes.
We're going to be. I think it's a 4-part class or a 5-part.
6.
6. Okay. Well, see, yeah.
6.
Yeah. And I want the last class to actually to give the budding playwrights the opportunity to maybe do a light production or a reading of their work.
Right, and that's exactly why it's 6, because that 6th class we talked about being that production time.
And I think they're going to be anywhere from 10 to 15-minute plays. That's what I'm encouraging, and it's just going to give people a good introduction to playwriting. We're going to explore things like dynamic analysis, writing dialogue, just how do people actually talk? How do people actually interact? I'm going to talk about the realities of playwriting and getting your play produced. Some people want to write a play with like 20 characters. Not going to get produced because guess what? You gotta pay all those people.
Cast that.
Exactly. You got to costume it. Exactly.
Right.
And you want to keep, especially with a short play, you want to keep your characters to a minimum. I've never written a one-person show, but I think that would be interesting. 2 to 3 people, I think, maximum for like a 10 to 15-minute production, I think is fine. So we're going to be exploring those as well.
Excellent. I understand you have a children's book coming out probably around September.
Yep.
Monster Garden.
Monster Garden.
I've read, and I just think it's delightful. So tell us a little bit about where you got your inspiration for this book.
Okay, well, I was inspired. Obviously I've been to a lot of author events over the last few years. And, here I am plugging away for Better Boxed and Forgotten, and I'm doing pretty good at these events and whatnot. I look over 5 booths and I see someone who's written, a couple of children's books, and there's a line out the door wrapped around the building twice for those children's books. Grandma and grandpa and aunts and uncles and mom and dad are buying Junior and Sis those children's books. And I'm thinking, maybe I want a little bit of that too. But, of course, it's not strictly monetary. I did have a good story to tell. And I think this is universal because it addresses a child's first day jitters of kindergarten. I think that, you're taking a 5-year-old child and, they've been introduced to the idea of school with preschool and things like that and Head Start and whatnot. But now we're taking our child and we're sending them to this building with like 25 or 30 other kids with a teacher and with special teachers and everything like that. Specials, music, gym, art.
Right.
And my goodness, that can be super overwhelming, especially for a 5-year-old mind to process. And in this book, I have little Aaron who allows his imagination to run a little wild with him. So he's convinced himself that he's not going to kindergarten. He's actually going to Monster Garden. And his imagination has run wild with him or from him. And he just he doesn't know how to process this. And he practically has a breakdown before he goes to bed the night before kindergarten. And the next morning, his sister Emily shows up and she's in 2nd grade, so she knows the ropes, and she kind of shows Aaron what kindergarten and what school is really all about. And
we're going to leave it there because I don't want to give away too much of this book because I think it's super duper fun.
Well, in my completely unbiased opinion, it's charming.
It
and
is
your child
charming.
will love it.
It is absolutely delightful. I have young nieces and nephews that I'm going to buy this book for.
Well, I appreciate that.
It is that lovely. So we're going to be running close to our end time here, but before we wrap things up, I want to make sure that we know that you're going to be attending the Pages Promotion Summer Book Festival June 22nd.
I will be there.
And you will be at other various places around town between now and September as opportunity presents itself, various festivals and stuff. So people should look for you, at places like Made in Michigan festivals and multimedia arts crafts festivals and specifically book festivals as those present themselves throughout the summer. You could be just about anywhere.
That's true. I've been to Made in Michigan festivals. I've been to various author events over the years. And chances are, if you happen to go to your city or nearby town's festival, I may be set up in a booth with a fellow author, even you. There's a chance for that. Because you and I have a rich history of spending time at booths together, both in Ann Arbor and Sterling Fest.
We do indeed. It's super fun.
It is.
It's always more fun to spend the day at a festival with a fellow author.
I agree. It is a lot of fun. And not only that, but when you have to take like a little break or you want to walk around, there's always someone manning the booth.
That's right. Authors got to eat.
Authors got to eat, exactly. So
in the last couple of minutes of our conversation today, I'd like you to touch on, just real briefly, because we have about 5 minutes left, I'd like you to talk a little bit about the podcast. Okay. Where that comes from, what it's about, and where it's going. Okay,
the podcast. I actually started writing these scripts. You know, podcasts are kind of all the rage right now. You know, you have a lot of newsy podcasts. Mm-hmm. I'm actually a big fan of the one that the New York Times does. I'm a little bit of a newsie myself. You know, I always like to know what's going on. But I thought it would be fun to have, you know, I'm really kind of enmeshed in this whole paranormal world, having written a paranormal novel. And I wrote one, I have a podcast that's called Dark Waters. And they're stories of the paranormal that take place in and around the Great Lakes, you know, Michigan. But what mine do, instead of it just being, say, a simple ghost story, there's a social issue tied to it. For example, I have a story. The first one is actually with the alarming title. It's called "The Baby in the Dumpster." It takes place in Detroit, but it addresses gentrification. We're all thrilled about what's going on in downtown Detroit, but we all have to be careful at the same time about, you know, how gentrification can rear its ugly head. Sure. So not only is it a monster story, it's a story about gentrification. I have another one that takes place in the Leelanau Peninsula that's a ghost story, but that deals with an element that comes to town and divides its people. There's a lot of division in our society right now. People on the right, people on the left. So this ghost story addresses that as well. And then I have another one, the one that we recorded with you, by the way. That's a story. It's a witch story. It's called The Queen of Decay. That was so much fun. It was fun. And I think it was very well cast, too. Yes. But that one deals with the environment. It deals with deforestation and whatnot and how maybe nature fights back. You know, so not only are they fun paranormal stories, but I'm tying, a timely element to them as well. Yeah. So what's the thought about the next installment of the podcast, and when might we see it, and where can we find it? Well, I'm hoping that I'm going to have them. I want 5 episodes in the can, as they say. And then once that's done, I'm going to release them probably once every 2 weeks. Now, the next episode, it's been a while since the script is done, but what it is actually a vampire story that takes place in Flint. And, of course, it deals with the Flint water crisis. Okay. And then the last one takes place in the Grosse Pointes, and I'm still working on that one. So, but when can we expect it? This summer sometime. Okay. I will definitely, I have a website. Yep, we have your website crawling on the bottom of the screen right now, so that people can write it down and make sure. A Lark's Perch is www.alarksperch.com. See what I did there with that?
I saw that. I thought
Lark's
that
perch.
was
Yeah.
that's great
Clever,
literary cleverness right
Well,
there.
Yeah,
That's
just yeah. There's
well, when you're blessed with a last name that you can work with that way,
it's a fun last name. Absolutely.
Yeah, and it helps for marketing and advertising.
But I will post. I want to have a link to these podcasts that you can access through my website as well, and they're fun. And I hire professional actors, and we perform them. And my nephew Jesse Lark does the music for them.
Yeah, very talented man.
Absolutely. And then they're professionally recorded by my dear friend Bill Harris out in Rochester Hills. He has this amazing recording studio. So this is not just someone using, GarageBand on their iPhone. These are actually professionally produced, and they sound great.
Yeah, they
And they're
really
fun.
do. And I remember when we helped you produce the last one, it was so much fun to have a live audience,
That was fun.
real actors. I'm hoping that we can find another opportunity to do that again.
I would too, and I would definitely let you know about that. And all the actors that I used, well, first of all, they were stellar, and they still have the same amount of enthusiasm as before. So, I look forward to. So you can see, I have fingers in lots of pies.
We all do.
Right?
Creative souls are kind of stuck that way.
Yeah, exactly. So
thank you again for coming out today. I really appreciate you being here. For those of you who would like to find Andrew's work online, you can go to his website, which again is alarksperch.com. Find his work there. You can also find him on Facebook. And are you on any other social media?
I'm on
places?
Instagram as Andrew Lark. I really haven't wrapped my head around the whole Twitter thing. I don't know.
I'm working
what
on
can
it
I
too.
say? Yeah. I tell people they lost me at Pong. So
I'm in that boat as well.
Right.
So thank you everybody for joining us, and thank you again for coming in. And I hope to do this again soon when Monster Garden comes out.
Thank you very much indeed.
Have a great night.
You too.